Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Columbus and Jim Garrity.
And I am Rich McFadden from Radio America here for Greg Columbus today, who will be back with you tomorrow. And as always, Jim Garrity from National Review joins us to go through your top martinis of the day. We always serve up a good, bad, and crazy martini. And since we're starting off the new year here and have a new Congress coming in, promises to be a very interesting day. Jim, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Rich.
Thank you, sir. And you know what will make it a very happy New Year for all of us? Senator Harry Reid's last day. You have to like that now. But are we kind of going out of the frying pan into the fire with Chuck Schumer coming in?
I think this is not just a good martini in that this is the last day that we'll say current Senator Harry Reid. Starting tomorrow, he is former Senator Harry Reid and full-time resident of the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C. Harry Reid, is one of the longtime foes of this podcast. Greg and I, when he's around, like to use our recurring theme, way to go, Nevada, way to go. I don't know if we'll end up saying "way to go, New York, way to go." I think there is a key. We should have no illusions about a Democratic Senate minority leader is going to stand opposed to what conservatives want most of the time, and just about all the time.
Sure.
However,
that's their job.
Yeah, there's some signs that Schumer is at least willing to listen to the Joe Manchins and Mark Warners of his caucus. And we can argue about whether those really qualify as moderates or they simply seem moderate compared to the rest of the Senate Democratic caucus. But Harry Reid very much was an autocrat, very much believed what he said went, and occasionally would irritate other Democratic senators by basically taking stances that were much more partisan and much more hardline than some Senate Democrats were comfortable with. So we might see a little bit more flexibility coming from Chuck Schumer. He says he wants to be a more collegial and more consensus building as a leader of the Democrats. Now, this is not going to make a huge difference for the cause of conservatism, but I do think that besides the fact of his ideology, Harry Reid was just a horrible human being. And that as much as we may not like Chuck Schumer, I haven't seen Chuck Schumer come out and say Mitt Romney hasn't paid taxes or stuff like that. So by the very low bar being better than Harry Reid, so far Chuck Schumer clears that low bar, and we might get a slightly a Senate Democratic caucus that is slightly easier to work with, an advancement of good legislation. Not getting enormously hopes up high, but
hey, listen, they all talk a good game, and then once the action starts, all the bets are off. So I guess I'm hopeful, and we'll wait and see. But I'm not going to bet the ranch on anything yet, that there's going to be this bipartisan relationship between Schumer and anybody else. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, no, actually, but probably a bad sign for conservatives will be the fact that Trump and Schumer have ties going back lots of years. And you might look at that and say, hey, where are the conservatives in there?
Yeah.
But all things considered, the fact that some Democrats see Harry Reid's leadership style as a colossal failure and not to be emulated strikes me as good news for everyone.
That's the only way they can be taken. All right, on to the bad. And this one, I need some help here, all right? Because I've, gone through a couple of stories. I cannot find any reason why the Republicans would want to modify the Office of Congressional Ethics. There's got to be a good reason. I'm sure there is, but why would you start with this?
Yeah, I wrote this morning in the Morning Jolt that I don't like this move. I do think it's a little bit more complicated than the House GOP Guts Ethics Panel headlines you're finding in places like that. So there was this institution called the Office of Congressional Ethics. Democrats established it when they took over in 2006 after the Abramov scandal. And the idea was this was this institution that was independent from the House, even though it was funded by the House of Representatives. And you could go to them with allegations of wrongdoing. And they had this two-step process of investigating. They would look into it. And they would. There are two things that this office could do. It could issue a public report saying, "Here's what we found, and this is what we think is a violation of ethics, et cetera, et cetera." And the second thing they could do is then refer the matter to the House Ethics Committee, which is made up of 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, and let them decide what the appropriate punishment can do. And once in a great while, the House Ethics Committee would rebuke one of its members, and it could institute fines, or it could push for a formal punishment by the House, a formal rebuke, a resolution of things like that. And it did happen once in a great while. Obviously, the House Ethics Committee, some people would argue whether it's sufficiently toothsome or whether it's toothless against its own members. But this is being treated as a 5-alarm fire. And I'm pointing out that if you look over the worst cases in which, members of the House have really been nailed, Rich, it's not really this office that's been the driving force behind it. It actually has been the FBI, Department of Justice, and U.S. attorneys, who are all independent of Congress. And so I'm looking at this saying, I don't like this move, but I don't see this as being this enormous sea change in ethics laws. And I kind of feel like, when I hear the likes of Josh Marshall and Paul Krugman saying this is, the end of the world,
So it's just more redundant government that they're trying to clean up. This is draining the swamp. This is step 1 to draining the swamp.
Then the argument is, though, that, of course, because under the new rules, this new office won't be able to put forth a public report without permission from the House Ethics Committee. This was opposed by Paul Ryan. This was opposed by a bunch of Republican leaders. But apparently, there's a majority of House Republicans who feel like they've been unfairly targeted, or mountains have been made out of molehills, or things like that. So there's an argument to be said against this. What is indisputable is that the optics look terrible, and no less a figure than President-elect Donald Trump has said he can't believe the House is beginning with this, and he's rebuking them over this. So. It looks like a self-imposed black eye for House Republicans, although for what it's worth, House Speaker Paul Ryan has just said, look, the office is not going to be controlled by the committee. The oversight authority will be exercised solely to ensure the office is properly following its rules and laws, just as any government entity should. This House will hold members accountable to the people.
Good. Thank you, Paul Ryan. It's all fine and well, but you guys need a marketing expert in there, because this is it's bad timing, bad move.
Yeah,
to start out with.
The only people are going to remember are the headlines saying House GOP guts ethics office.
Exactly. So. All right, well, hopefully they'll be able to step around this pile and move on to the next thing and get their first 100 days in order. But, chin up. All right, on to the crazy, and this is crazy. Those dastardly Russians, again, are hacking our electronic grid, and they're going to take down our whole electric grid, according to the Washington Post. Oops, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I had written about this yesterday. The initial story was shocking. It sounded like the opening scene of War Games, or that really, really bad Die Hard movie about hacking. And then it said that the Russians were targeting the electrical grid in Vermont, and that by golly, this was the statements from Patrick Leahy and these other Vermont Democrats would make you believe that World War III is imminent. That this was Russia trying to take down the electricity in the middle of winter in Vermont and freeze everyone. Now, a couple days later, after the initial story has been spread around the world, we find from the Washington Post, quoting unnamed federal officials, quote, they are finding evidence that the incident is not linked to any Russian government to target or hack the utility. And they also say that an employee of the electric department was checking his Yahoo email account, triggered an alert indicating the computer had connected to a suspicious IP address. Now, apparently, the traffic with this particular address is found elsewhere in the country and is not unique to Burlington Electric, meaning that it wasn't targeted by the Russians. And also, it's possible that the traffic is benign, since this particular IP address is not always connected to malicious activity. But other than that, Rich, the story was right.
Wow.
I mean, this is going from a DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5, and on the one hand, kind of relief. It's more than a little frustrating and unnerving that the Post could run with a story like this and get the facts so enormously wrong.
It's more fake news.
It is. I was going to say there are a lot of reporters who would say, "Oh, this is totally different from that, Macedonian teenager-produced fake news that you get on Facebook." And I think, in the eyes of the news viewer, completely inaccurate news isn't that different from fake news.
No, not at all.
That's
It's
a
the
subtle
same
nuance that is going to escape a lot of them, and I think that there's a good reason to be griping about this. Now, look, if we had not just had the story of Russian hack, the constant invocation of the phrase "hacked the election," no, right? Podesta hit a phishing email caught Podesta. They got into it. They released his emails. Did that affect the election? We can debate that. I don't think you can say it's decisive or turned the election. But the second thing is that you've heard the phrase "hacked the election" so much that now 52% of Democrats believe the vote totals were hacked by Russia. There's no evidence of this whatsoever, but it's easier for them to deal with the defeat if they tell themselves, "Oh, our candidate really won, not just the popular vote, but won the actual electoral college, but all that Russian hackers got in there and changed the vote totals and stuff like that."
Yeah. Two things I know for sure. A, Hillary was a horrible candidate. B, the Russians are trying to hack everything they can, but these two things aren't one of them that they've been successful at.
Yeah, Rich, I find myself as a traditional Russian hawk who does not like or trust Vladimir Putin, wants a tougher line, thought we should have had a tougher line after he took over Crimea, don't like the way he's harassing Eastern Europe and doing the flyovers and testing NATO air. There are a lot of reasons to get upset with Vladimir Putin, and the only thing that seems to get the media and Democrats fired up about him are two things he didn't actually do.
Right, exactly. Yet
so
everybody ignores.
You and I are having to say, "Hey, this isn't actually accurate." Are we defenders of Putin? Heck no. We were applauding Mitt Romney 4 years ago when Obama was scoffing.
I always think back to that moment when Mitt Romney was saying, and Obama said to him, "What do you think this is 1980? The Cold War is over." Are you kidding me? Romney was right. And these guys are bad guys.
It's going to be a broad bipartisan agreement of that. Terrific. My suspicion is that this is just a convenient Democratic effort to find a scapegoat for a defeat that completely blindsided them. So anyway, that's where we are. It just seems, madness upon madness.
I'm sure the Chicken Little, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming is not over, and we're certainly going to see and talk about more of that. Until then, that's our 3 martinis for this Tuesday. And Greg Columbus back with you tomorrow with Jim Garrity from the National Review. I am Rich McFadden from the Radio America Network, and we will see you tomorrow for your martinis.